Hello there folks, I'm back again with another speed paint for you guys, and finally it is November, which means sadly my October Halloween themed challenges are over, but November is home to its own art challenge, and that is Huevember. I haven't ever actually properly participated in Huevember. I mean, there's been a few years where I did the first few prompts or so, but sadly I've never made it through all 30 of the colors. So I've never actually completed it, despite having completed a lot of different 30-day challenges in my time. And while I'm not exactly going to be doing Huevember in this video, I thought I would capture the spirit of it with a color wheel illustration. I remember it was a trend a little while back, I guess at this point maybe over a year ago, where people would draw different characters set up in a nice little color wheel composition, and it would look really cute, usually be like fan art of a bunch of different characters from different stories and stuff. And I just thought that was really cool. I even did a similar thing for Art Fight this year with a bunch of my friends' characters. So I figured I would revisit that concept even if it's a little bit out of date now, because honestly, I feel like color wheels are kind of timeless, and I thought it would be a cool way to do something Huevember adjacent for the month of November. So I thought, what better kind of character to put in a color wheel than a Pokémon? Or better yet, shiny Pokémon. The exact type of character that is praised for their colors. So without further ado, let's get into the speed paint. Alright, so for this color wheel I decided to narrow down my selection of Pokemon. After all, if I had to pick from all over 1,000 shiny Pokemon, well, it would be a little hard to choose. I know I wanted to go with the 6 basic colors, you know, your 6 primary colors and your 6 secondary colors. And to make the list a little easier to deal with, I decided I would narrow down to the Hoenn region. This way it would be a little easier for me to pick, and I also thought it would open up the possibility for more region-based color wheel illustrations in the future. And I went with Hoenn because I love Hoenn, and it was my first region that I had ever played as a kid, and I feel like the starters are very representative of a few different colors, which is to say purple for Swampert, blue for Sceptile, and red for Blaziken. Now, a lot of people criticize Blaziken's shiny as being kind of terrible, which, I mean, it's not very exciting, but it is pretty good. Like, I think it's very solid. I think it's, like, subtle, but I do like the color that it is. And overall, the 3 starters, if you were to put them on a color wheel, would all be right next to each other. So that inspired me to do a composition where I would have our 3 starters, and I would also have 3 regular random Hoenn Pokemon that would fill in the rest of the colors. These colors being orange, yellow, and green. Obviously, blue, purple, and red are all taken, so I had to do some looking around at the shiny Pokemon of Hoenn. And I went with some of, honestly, at least to me, these are some of the most distinctive shinies of the region. While I'm always a fan of a nice subtle shiny, these 3 are actually pretty noticeable, I would say. First we have Zigzagoon, who I used to represent the color orange. Zigzagoon is really cute, probably one of my favorite of like the regional mammal archetype of Route 1 Pokemon. I just think it's adorable. I used to have a dog named Siggy when I was a kid, and I always kind of associated the two in my mind, so I've always found Zigzagoon to be very, very cute. And while usually when I look at shiny Zigzagoon, I think about it being more of a vibrant brown, if that makes sense, than orange. I mean, brown really is just muted orange, so when you get down to it, it's a very, very orange shiny Pokemon, and I thought it would be really cute to do. Another one that I personally find very cute and is a childhood favorite of mine is Nosepass. I know when people think of cute Pokemon, they don't usually think of like the object Pokemon, right? Like those are usually not the ones people think about, but you know, I've always thought Nosepass was really cute. Like, I don't know what it is about it. Maybe it's like the blocky body, maybe it's like the closed eyes, or maybe it's those little flappy arms, or maybe it is that big gosh darn compass nose on its face. I don't know what it is about Nosepass, but I love that guy. I have the Sitting Cutie of it from the Hoenn collection. It is so cute. And shiny Nosepass, well, that little dude looks like a big block of cheddar cheese, so obviously I wanted to draw that. And I thought it would make a very, very good representation for the color yellow. I also wanted to draw Nosepass in a bit more of an action-y pose, so I kind of have it with its arms flailing up, like it's running around joyously and frolicking, which is a very funny thing for a Pokemon that looks like this to do. And last but certainly not least, I have my green representative, which is Spinda. Now Spinda, I mean, everybody thinks Spinda is really cool. It's a very neat Pokemon. It's got that unique gimmick with the spots and stuff. I think it's really cute. I know it looks like a bunny, and I know it's supposed to be a panda, but it just ends up landing somewhere a little bit in the middle for me that I think is pretty charming. And I think those little swirly eyes and swirly ears are just so cute. Spinda's spot patterns are, I believe, made up of 4 different spots that are all kind of placed onto its sprite in a different way. And some of them don't always end up fully on the sprite, which I think is how you get those partial ones, and they can also overlap. So while I didn't exactly generate a real Spinda in order to do this, I do think this one might be able to actually exist because of how I did the spots. Let me know in the comments if you can find this Spinda. I mean, that would be a very crazy task if you decide to do that. But if you do, that would be really cool. I'd love to see it. So overall for this composition, I originally did the circle. Obviously, you gotta start with the wheel. The entire composition is based on that color wheel, so, I mean, you gotta start there. I made 6 panels, as is usually the tradition with the color wheel illustrations. And up on our top left sort of corner, we have the starters, and on the bottom right, we have the other Pokemon. And for the sketch layer, I decided I would do different color layers to differentiate each Pokemon, also for me to remember which one each color is going to be. I originally had Spinda facing one way, but then I realized it was facing the same way as Blaziken, and I wanted to balance out the composition a little more, so I ended up turning around Spinda's pose to face the other way. I also originally wasn't going to have the Pokemon popping out of the panels. I did that originally with my art fight illustration, but I wasn't sure if I should do it or how to like do vector layer stuff that I wanted to do in this piece, so during the sketch I wasn't exactly planning on it. I was planning on just cropping everything to just stay cleanly in the panels. But as I was doing the composition and as I started figuring out how to set up the line layer, I ended up actually being able to do that. So I ended up changing a couple of these poses so the Pokemon are able to overlap with the borders a little bit, pop out a little more, and make the composition a little more exciting. There was a lot of line art to contend with in this piece. I had to come up with a different pose for all the different Pokemon, and I wanted them to sort of reflect each other since this is a very symmetrical piece, while also looking pretty different. Obviously we have Blaziken up at the top. Obviously he was the first one that got the line art treatment. And Blaziken is weirdly one of the most challenging of the Pokemon in this piece. I guess I've never actually sat down to draw him before, and the face crest was a little confusing for me at first, but once I figured out sort of the shape of it and how the beak interacts with the side, I found it actually kind of fun to do. I think Blaziken has a very nice little design. I've also noticed this sort of trend with the Hoenn final starter forms where they all have these pretty distinctive, like, shoulders, I guess, for lack of a better word. Like, their shoulder slash, like, deltoid ball and joint area is always kind of noticeable and bony looking. It's always kind of noticeable and bony looking a little bit. Like, obviously for Blaziken, it's because he's got, like, bird leg sort of arms. Swampert, they're pretty distinctive, and Sceptile, they're pretty distinctive, and I just thought that was an interesting thing that sort of ties all 3 of these guys together, even though they're all pretty different in terms of their design. Now, Blaziken, of course, was a little bit weird, but I was able to get a good pose for him. I had his claw reaching out of the composition because I thought that would be kind of fun. And I kind of wanted to make it look like he might be flexing or doing something active while also still doing a fairly neutral angled pose because he is in the center. I didn't want him leaning more on one side than the other. And I think I found a nice little happy compromise there. Next up was Zigzagoon, who I drew sitting down like a cute little puppy dog. This was a pretty simple pose to do. I mean, Zigzagoon's like fluffy body allows you to really futz around and kind of fake it till you make it with its pose, which I don't normally have to do with Zigzagoon, but it made it really easy to like plop it down and make it seem like it's sitting without having to do a lot of work as far as the drawing goes. You also have to keep track of like the stripe layers because there are only so many, so I was trying to keep track of where the head was. I didn't want to add too many or too few, because I wanted the leg color to make sense still with the head, since the legs are actually the light, because they're on the light stripe beneath the head. And yeah, it's like a whole thing. There's like a whole pattern to the way Zigzagoon is, even though it seems chaotic at first. And I'm pretty happy with how I was able to do that, and setting up the lines really made the coloring of it way, way easier later on. Zigzagoon also has this cute, like, bumpy mouth. I feel like there's a lot of Pokemon in Gen 3 who kind of have this shape to their mouth. Like Swampert also has this like raggedy line. It sort of reminds me of that one Mii face, you know, the one Mii mouth where it's like a jagged zigzag. I just think that it's really cute, and it gives them a more like animalistic, ragged feel that I think is just really charming on a lot of Pokemon, including Zigzagoon and Swampert. And then of course there is Nosepass. Nosepass is facing in toward the composition, so I tried to alternate it, where Blaziken's facing left, Zigzagoon is facing out, Swampert's facing out, and Sceptile and Nosepass are both facing in toward the center. This was part of how I was able to bring a balance to this whole piece, even though it is, like, it's simultaneously a piece that's very much about the symmetry, while also definitely needing to be asymmetrical just because these designs are all so different from each other. And Nosepass, to have it face in, obviously, you gotta rotate that body, have its nose over there. I actually plopped down Nosepass first. Obviously, when I was doing my sketch, I did everything in color order, as you can see. And so I basically really just had to manipulate Sceptile to make it look like it was turning inward toward the composition, so it would be all balanced. And of course, I drew that little action-y pose for Nosepass. Nosepass isn't very complicated. You just have to really look at reference to know where the different, like, vertexes and edges on its body are, because they're not terribly intuitive. It's got a simultaneously, like, regular and irregular shape to it, for lack of a better term for me to describe, that at least that I can think of right now. Like, it looks like just a random chunk of rock that fell down, but it also looks like a fairly clean shape. So you kind of have to futz around to get the lines right for Nosepass to make it look recognizable as Nosepass's silhouette. Then, of course, there's Spinda, really simple Pokemon. One of my favorite things about Spinda's design is its mouth. The way that it's open is just, like, so funny to me. Like, it's such a distinctive little mouth shape. Like, I feel like when anime characters have their mouth open like that, they're, like, nervous or drunk or something, and I think that kind of fits Spinda's ever-dizzy, silly, clumsy vibe just absolutely perfectly. And of course, there is Sceptile. This is when I started getting back into lining the starters. They have the most complex design easily out of any of the 6 Pokemon that are in this color wheel. I mean, I chose them mostly for their color, but it does help that half of them have very simple designs that are pretty easy to draw. Sceptile was, of course, my starter when I first started playing Pokemon Emerald as a kid. Actually, to be honest, I just chose Trico because my parents both chose Mudkip and I wanted to have the type advantage over them. And as a kid, Mudkip was my favorite, but I did want to have the type advantage, so that is why I went with Trico. And I didn't end up actually evolving my Trico all the way up until I finally dug up my childhood copy of the game and finished it when I was in about 8th grade, going into 9th grade. During that summer, I dug up my old Emerald save file, revamped my team, and well, I did everything. I beat the Elite Four, I beat the game, I caught the legendary Pokemon. I did basically everything I hadn't done when I was a kid. And I hadn't done a lot as a kid. Actually, embarrassingly, I got lost in Dewford Tunnel for, like, literally years, but that's mostly because I didn't know where the cartridge was. And as it turns out, I went to pull out the strategy guide so I could actually once and for all get out of that cave when I picked it back up when I turned 13. And guess what? I was like maybe 10 steps away from the exit that whole time. So, you know, sometimes when you're playing games as a kid, things are a lot more daunting than they actually are. And, you know, looking back on it with fresh eyes was very helpful, and my Emerald team was honestly one of my most balanced Pokemon teams in any playthrough. And of course, my star on my team was my very first Pokemon, my Trico, who at the time was a Grovyle, and then eventually I was able to get up to a Sceptile. Her name's Lil Acorn, and she was a female starter, which is pretty cool to get that 1 in 8 chance on your very first Pokemon. And yeah, I named her when I was 5, so that's why her name's Lil Acorn. I mean, it's a cute name, and I think it's a classic. So even though Lil Acorn is a non-shiny, just regular old Sceptile, I still have a soft spot for shiny Sceptile since I do think about my original Pokemon whenever I draw them. And then of course there's Swampert. I love Swampert. Design-wise, I think Swampert's probably my favorite of the Hoenn starters. Like, honestly, even including the base forms and the middle evolutions, like, I don't know. I don't know why. I just think Swampert's, like, really cute. I don't know. I feel like I've heard people say that they think Swampert's, like, weird and ugly looking. Obviously, there was the Terra leak fairly recently where a lot of people expressed that they wish we got that beta rabbit instead of, like, the Mudkip line, but I don't know. While I think that Beta Rabbit is pretty darn cute, I don't know. I really like the Mudkip line, and I really, really like Swampert. Swampert, I don't know. There's just something about it. Its stance is like so funny. It's kind of like low to the ground. It feels like it's so in prime pose to be hugged at all times. And I don't know, I just think Swampert's really cute, and I think anyone who doesn't see that is a fool and needs to look harder. I just think Swampert is just a wonderful Pokemon. I feel like it's kind of underrated as a starter Pokemon, and I don't know, I just think it deserves a little bit more attention and a little bit more love. Anyway, Swampert's shiny is freaking crazy. Like, I think I do prefer the original blue color palette when it comes to Swampert, but you know, that purpley pink, it is cool. It is a very fun color for a starter. I feel like sometimes starters get very subtle shinies. I mean, looking at you, Blaziken. And while those subtle shinies can be pretty good, like, I really do like the Sprigatito line's subtle shiny of just changing a couple things to purple. I think that's pretty cool. It is pretty fun to have a starter Pokemon that has a very crazy looking shiny form. I just think it's so dramatic, it's so funny, it's such a weird, awkward color, and I totally adore it. And in some ways, the, like, pink undertone of it almost calls back to, like, actual axolotls. Like, I don't think there are any blue axolotls, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure while they do come in many colors, I don't think blue is one of them. So I just think it's pretty cool to see the shiny, whether intentionally or not, like, still have some axolotl in nature vibes. And to be so dramatic and weird. Like, I mean, the Trico line's shiny is very strange. Like, I love how weird it is. But there's like this perfect, just like, what if he was purple sort of vibe about the Swampert line, and I just think it's so fun. After doing the line art, which took, oh my gosh, a very long time, I was finally able to get down to the flat colors, which were pretty simple. I mean, lining and coloring feels like a very simple process to me. As always with very large multi-character pieces, I try to reuse colors as much as possible. So the yellow tone that is the hue of the white parts on Blaziken are used again in Zigzagoon's light cream, and Nosepass's yellow color, which is then used again in a more muted color for the body of Spinda. A lot of my blues and purples are all like reused. I used like the same sort of purple for the shading that I did on Swampert for everything. So yeah, it was a lot of work. Getting through, I mean, if you have this many characters to color in, even if it's kind of easy, you just have to, you know, click on a lot of spaces and go through. I know some people color a lot of things by hand digitally. It could not be me. I think I really like just being able to plop down and make decisions pretty quick and using the fill tool. And I think like it's like 50-50 among the community. Like, I think a good amount of people fill and a good amount of people hand color. I don't think I could ever hand color unless my lines were really just too loose to use the fill tool, because I find hand coloring to be, well, it's a little tough on the hands, very carpal tunnel aggravating. And using the fill tool makes it a lot easier to change your mind about things as well and to make adjustments, so that's why I do it. I mean, y'all can do whatever you want, but I'm here to talk about my process, so that's what I'm doing. It's so funny when you have a Pokemon that has distinct eye shines. I feel like there's a lot of Pokemon like Eevee, Pikachu, Zigzagoon here that they just look like they're so anxious or scared or scary or creepy when they don't have the eye shines on their eyes yet, and it's just like the pupil and the iris just chilling out. So it's always so weird because I usually add highlights very late into the process, usually right at the very, very end, so sometimes a big Pokemon ensemble piece is also about me having to look at the creepy, unfinished eyes of a Pokemon for a good amount of the process. Overall, the flat colors went pretty smoothly. This was the time where I started putting in my dots for Spinda and was trying to think about how the sprites are generated, which I talked about before with the 4 dots, I believe. And I tried to make one that looks like, not one of those like traditionally cool looking ones. Like, I feel like some people try to find like Spindas that look like they have like a heart or something cute like that. I really wanted this one to look like your average run-of-the-mill Spinda that you get with a weird, awkward spot pattern. and also try to keep it a little bit balanced. So I think I did pretty good. I mean, there's 2 dots on either side of its head, really. It's a little weird looking, and I just think it's really cute. After coloring in everything, I decided to go into the background and, of course, color all the backgrounds of the panels. For each panel, I did like a little gradient sort of thing to keep it from being a flat color. And then on top of that, I did something to add some sort of noise or texture to give it a little more visual interest than just like a flat color. Plus, I thought it would provide a little more contrast from the Pokemon, who are fairly flat in terms of the way that they are colored, versus the backgrounds, which are slightly more painterly. For each one, I used basically different types of brushes in order to give the texture. I used a lot of like color jitter as well, because I thought that would be more visually interesting, and again, provide a little bit more contrast against the Pokemon themselves. After all, a lot of them, I mean, they are the color of their panel, so I had to figure out a way to make the panel clearly read as the same color as the Pokemon, without that Pokemon getting lost into the background. After that, I decided it was time for, gotta do the background a little bit, right? So I made the background black for this piece. The last time I did a color wheel piece, I did it with a white background, but for this one I ended up going black instead. I did put the white there for a little bit, but I thought it didn't look as good, so I went with the dark background instead. And I decided it was time to go ahead and shade all of the Pokemon. Now, this isn't as long and intensive as it sounds like it would be. I think it sounds like a huge process, but what I really do is I take like this purple color and I use a multiply layer and go through and I shade everything all on the same layer. And while that might lead to some like little messy bits between each Pokemon, I think it makes it a lot less work, and it makes it so they're all shaded under the same light, so it looks like they all belong together even though they're all in different panels. And I always try to, with my shadows, try to add a warmer hue along the rim to sort of mimic the anatomy of a real shadow, and also just to make it visually pop a little more. I think it's most obvious when you take a look at Nosepass and the way I shaded it. It is very rendered, and a lot of that popping that comes with that color is due to the edge of the shadow being a little bit pinker. I also went through and added a glow dodge layer to highlight on each of these things, and for each highlight I actually tried to use the color of each panel so it looks like the Pokemon are being kind of illuminated by each of their thing. After all, it wouldn't make very much sense if they were all under the same exact light, since they're all in their different little panels and environments, and some of the colors would probably get a little muted and lost if they were used on each other. For example, a yellow highlight on Swampert would probably just look a little dull and gray, since yellow and purple can cancel out each other. But I figured if I highlight using pretty much the same sort of color as the Pokemon themselves, it would make it look a little more vibrant, a little more harmonious, and help make each panel feel simultaneously unified and distinct, which is ultimately kind of the point of a color wheel illustration like this. Last but not least, it was time for, futzing around with the background. I put in some little rainbow discs in the background along the edge to give a little more visual interest. I put a grid back there because, well, I just love slapping a grid on a background. It makes everything look more finished. And then right at the end, as I was probably about to wrap up, I decided, you know what? It's time to go in there and add a couple manual highlights. So I went in with a very thin white inker and started adding some highlights around to help the Pokemon pop out against their background even more, and to make it look a little bit more glossy and almost sticker-like in some aspects. After I finished applying all this nice highlights, I went in with another layer and colored on top of them to make some of them a little less bright. After all, it would have been a little too high contrast in some places, and I wanted to make it a little more mellow. So I basically took a paler version of each color and used that on the more shaded parts of each highlight. It sounds weird when I say it with words, but visually you'll see what I mean as I do it. After all the highlights were done, that pretty much covered everything. I'm very, very happy with this piece. I think it came out really cute. It was very fun to do. It's fun to draw a lot of Pokemon. It's fun to work with a lot of colors, and it's been a while since I've done a color wheel illustration, and this was a very nice way to get back into it. And with that, that is all I've got for you guys today. Thank you all for sitting through that process. It was very involved, but I think it was really interesting, and I had a lot of fun working on this piece. I hope you had a lot of fun watching me draw it. I think this process of doing a color wheel is one of the most interesting kinds of things I can show someone how I do. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching it. I want to do another Pokemon color wheel at some point. I don't know what region I want to do or what theme I want to do next, so I guess we'll see where my inspiration takes me. Did you have a favorite Pokemon that was included in today's color wheel? Let me know in the comments below. I really love all these guys, but I think my favorite one in this one might be Swampert, but I mean, it's a little hard to pick. I mean, they're all so darn cute. If you would like to support me, I recommend checking out my Ko-fi page. I have that linked below. It's the best way that you can support me. Right now, I'm trying to work my way towards getting 100 followers on there, as well as 10 monthly subscribers. So if you would like to support me, help me keep making my art, help me feed my new pet, I would really appreciate it. And with that, that is all I've got for you guys today. I'll be back again next week with another speed paint for you guys. So in the meantime, go out there and make some art.